Now, back to New Hampshire as the clock continues to tick down here to the start of voting in the first-in-the-nation primary. Over the weekend, I caught up with several of the candidates during their frantic final sweeps across the state. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, entrepreneur Andrew Yang, and former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick were among them. But first, former Vice President Joe Biden. Here he is taking questions from reporters about South Bend, Indiana's former mayor, Pete Buttigieg.
Guess what? He was a mayor. He's a good guy. But the idea of passing a budget as mayor of a town the size of Manchester and managing $900 billion with less than 1% fraud or abuse, picking up his city and thousands of cities across the country, is ridiculous. So let's get straight. What's the problem? Where is the thing that's so bad in the past?
Isn't his point, though, that that was that moment, that we're now in a different moment, and this moment requires different leadership?
That's not what he's saying. He's saying that the problems we have now are because of the past. That's what he's saying. Let's get that straight, okay? Period. Number two, the problems we have today are we need not different leaders. We have to continue the leadership and move it on. I never said there's going to be a third term of Barack Obama.
For me, this last few days before the primary vote is all about get out the vote, building that excitement, and getting the people to New Hampshire behind me. And I cannot believe what I'm hearing up on that stage. There are a bunch of independents moderate Republicans who are registered independents that have decided to vote because they can't stand Trump. There are a bunch of people who were with other candidates who, after the debate, changed over to me. That's what we're seeing in the polls. And then we have undecideds up the wazoo. And I tell them to look at me as a fresh face, and that in this race between the vice president and Mayor Pete, I say that 59 is the new 38, and that it is good to have someone new, but it's also good to have someone with experience.
How do you get how do you get people to turn out for you? I had talked to one gentleman who said, I really like him, but I worry he doesn't have a chance.
Well, the great thing about New Hampshire is that they determine who has a chance and who doesn't. They're very independent-minded here. They're going to do what they think is best for the country, and I certainly trust them. But yeah, we're feeling great about the campaign here. We also spent a lot of money on TV ads here.
You agree, though, that Pete Buttigieg doesn't have the experience of some of the other candidates?
Well, he certainly doesn't have the experience of some of the other candidates. The question many voters are asking is, what is the kind of experience they're looking for, the judgment, the values, the priorities, the vision.
I've been in New Hampshire more than any other candidate, including the candidates who've been in this race for months and years. And it is true, I have not spent my time making myself famous over the last couple of years, but I've spent the last 40 years making a difference. And I think that the kind of primary that's run here in New Hampshire, the expectations of New Hampshire voters, that you are intimate, that you spend time with them, that you talk and listen to them, is a great opportunity to make that case. And as we make that case here, if we get the vote we want here, that gives us momentum moving forward.
And that's where we will begin this special New Hampshire edition of Politics Monday. With me here in Manchester in the studios of WGBH, our partner station, are James Pindell of the Boston Globe and Lauren Chooljian of New Hampshire Public Radio. She's the host of the Stranglehold podcast, whose entire focus is on this presidential primary. Great to have you both with us. Thank you so much.
It's an honor.
Thanks for having us.
So let me just start with a very basic question, Lauren. How clear are the candidates' messages coming across in this state?
For reporters who have been covering them over and over again, it feels like they're very clear because they sound the same every time you get there. But, it's funny when you talk to voters, they really do get excited and they feel like these messages are resonating with them. I cover Pete Buttigieg the most for us at NHPR, and a lot of people say to me they like his energy, they feel like they believe what he's saying, that he's thoughtful, and they like that he's a uniter. That is definitely one of his big pitches, and that's where he's kind of like done a couple pokes at Bernie Sanders, who of course is neck and neck with the polls. There were a couple moments where he starts to criticize the call for a revolution, and he says that we need to focus on uniting, not dividing. And now in a big arena for a state Democratic Party fundraiser, that didn't go over well, of course, with Bernie Sanders supporters, and showed that big divide in the party right now over, a feistier leader that is maybe more liberal. But, among his crowds, they really like what he's saying.
James Pindell, what are you hearing in messages from the candidates? candidate?
Well, it's a very good question you asked earlier, which is, are they able to get their messages out? Because these 2 weeks, every 4 years in the presidential race, are some of the most exciting and the most dramatic and it's raw politics. Yet, on top of all of it, these last 2 weeks, it's been really hard in the news environment to get their message out. You know, the first week in Iowa, I was out in Iowa, and impeachment was throughout the entire week. And we had 4 senators, obviously, running for president, also trying to compete. We had the Super Bowl happening. And this week began with a lot of confusion about process. What exactly did happen in Iowa? Then you had the State of the Union address, the first day of the New Hampshire primary. Wednesday, the president's acquitted. Now it starts to feel like the New Hampshire primary, and you are getting some momentum for candidates who, you know, Pete Buttigieg and lately Amy Klobuchar after that debate. It's starting to feel like voters are really starting to tune in and make some decisions, but you're right, the news environment's been very difficult for a lot of these candidates to break through.
Maybe, Lauren, that condensed time period that people have had to truly only focus on the candidates, maybe that explains some of the hard time voters seem to be having here making a decision.
I mean, I think we always, you know, the myth is that New Hampshire voters are they have a hard time making up their mind. And I think the large field hasn't helped with that. And I mean, I've talked to a lot of voters who continue to be undecided. Even in the polls, like from the Boston Globe, there's always that percentage of people who say, I think I know who I'm voting for, but I could change my mind before Election Day, which seems crazy. I know, because it feels like this election has been going on forever. But for some people, they just want to keep seeing candidates. There's also people who don't have time to go out and see candidates, right? I mean, we get a lot of attention for a very engaged population, but there are also a lot of people here who can't make these candidate events, and so they're just turning the TV on now, which also seems crazy for us. But I think that is a really unknown factor in this election. I think Amy Klobuchar is a great example of someone who's trying to capitalize on that.
You know, we hear so much about how this year especially, Democrats want someone to beat Donald Trump. So I guess my question, James, is that the overriding concern? I mean, set aside, you know, the left wing of the Democratic Party, the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. What is it that voters are looking for?
I think that's exactly right. Poll after poll says it. You hear it every single time I talk to a voter or I go door to door. I mean, this idea that typically, particularly Democratic primaries, are this battle between the head and the heart. You know, the one candidate on one side and then the candidate you know is most electable. That is not a debate at all. It's all about the head, who can beat it. And I think what's part is driving this indecision, it's not entirely obvious who that person is. And I think people are waiting for a moment, some clarity, some, maybe it's on the debate stage or some comment where it becomes crystal clear who that person is, and they have yet to see that.
And I hear, for example, you hear Bernie Sanders saying this is the most important election in our modern time. In fact, this morning I heard him say it may be the most important election ever in America. It's maybe a slight hyperbole.
Julius Caesar, that election just has nothing on this.
On the other hand, Joe Biden, Lauren, saying, well, I could take a hit here, lowering expectations.
That was certainly a stunning moment on the debate stage, and I know some supporters of his were kind of struck by that, and also people who are on the fence and are trying to see how he does in these last remaining days were also struck by that. New Hampshire people want to know that the voters take them seriously. They want to feel important, right? And for someone to just kind of throw it out early and say, I'm probably going to take a hit here, I think, you know, that made an impression with people.
And one more thing on that, Judy. As you know, you've been covering so many New Hampshire primaries.
So many.
These voters here love the story of the comeback.
Yeah.
They want someone they can get behind. They like them if they know and they're humble and they go out there on the hustings. And Joe Biden comes out here and says, I want to come back. Intellectually, I deserve a comeback, but it's probably not going to happen. Versus Amy Klobuchar, who's hitting every single diner in her running shoes, and she's talking people up, wanting to earn the vote like Bill Clinton, like Hillary Clinton, like John McCain, go down the line. The story for the comeback's there if a candidate actually goes in and tries to do it.
So meantime, Lauren, you have you're headed from this interview across the street
Right across the street.
none other than a rally for President Trump, who's come right into the belly of the beast.
Absolutely.
On the eve of the primary. How is that playing as voters think about this?
Well, I mean, of course he's here, right? I mean, he wants to have a big party to distract the attention away from this huge Democratic primary. He's also very popular here among New Hampshire Republicans. Last week, Vice President Pence's wife, Karen, was here. The Vice President was also here today. He's going to do a similar thing like he did in Iowa, where he brings in a lot of surrogates, because I think he wants to send a message that he really wants to do well in New Hampshire in 2020. This was, of course, one of his tightest margins in 2016. He's had his eye on it ever since. He was here in August. And so New Hampshire is extremely important to him, and there are a lot of people fired up to support him. I mean, the last couple events I've been to, there is like a bus or a something happening from Trump supporters outside. So they want to show that it isn't just about Democrats here.
A couple of Trump buses, yeah.
Technically, Donald Trump is in the New Hampshire primary tomorrow against
Right.
Bill Weld.
For sure. There is
he
still.
does have that. And I will say one last thing. When he tried this in Des Moines, the week before the Iowa caucuses, the impact was pretty obvious. The Des Moines Register the next day had a story about Trump, had a story about Mike Pence at the Drake Diner, and some ag stories, and not a single story on the front page about a Democratic presidential candidate, which really may be the play here.
And we'll see what happens right here in New Hampshire. We wouldn't miss it. We are all eyes on the Granite State. James Pindell, Lauren Shulgin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.